Your meatloaf tastes like cardboard wrapped in disappointment. Those were the last words my husband said to me before he slammed divorce papers onto the dinner table I had spent 3 hours setting, splattering red wine across the white linen tablecloth like a crime scene. Standing behind him, arms crossed with a smug smile, was my mother-in-law, Patricia, the woman who had spent 7 years convincing her son that I was slowly poisoning him with my inferior cooking. What neither of them knew was that the meatloaf recipe they had just insulted would be featured in Food and Wine magazine 12 months later, and the woman they called worthless would soon have a James Beard Award nomination with her name on it. My name is Isabella Bella Fontaine, and this is the story of how a meatloaf destroyed my marriage and built my empire. I need to take you back to where it all began, to a small apartment in Brooklyn where a young woman fell in love with the wrong man for the right reasons. I met Derek Morrison at a food truck festival in Williamsburg. I was 24, working as a line cook at a struggling Italian restaurant in Manhattan, dreaming of someday opening my own place. He was 28, a junior accountant at his family's financial firm, with blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a laugh that made everyone around him feel warm. He approached my station where I was serving handmade pasta with a sage brown butter sauce. "This is incredible," he said after his first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother," I replied. "She grew up in a small village outside Naples. She always said cooking was the purest form of love." Derek smiled at me like I had just revealed the secret of the universe. "Then you must love very deeply." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. I should have known then that he was too smooth, too polished, too perfect. But I was young and hungry for something more than recipes and restaurant shifts. I was hungry for belonging. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. During that time, I met his family exactly 3 times. His father, Harold, was pleasant enough, a quiet man who seemed more interested in his newspaper than in conversation. But his mother, Patricia, was a different story entirely. Patricia Morrison was the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. She came from old Connecticut money, the kind that whispered instead of shouted, the kind that destroyed you with politeness rather than confrontation. The first time I cooked for her, a simple roast chicken with herbs from my windowsill garden, she took one bite and set down her fork. "Interesting," she said. "Very rustic." I didn't know then that rustic was Patricia speak for peasant food. I didn't know that her carefully raised eyebrow was a declaration of war. I just smiled and offered her more wine, desperate to be accepted by the family of the man I loved. The wedding was beautiful, paid for entirely by the Morrisons, which meant it was controlled entirely by Patricia. My input was requested and then politely ignored. The menu, which I had hoped to design myself, was handed off to a catering company that specialized in elegant American cuisine, which apparently meant bland chicken breasts and overcooked vegetables arranged artfully on white plates. My grandmother, who had flown in from Naples for the occasion, pulled me aside during the reception. "Bella, la mia cara," she whispered, her eyes filled with concern. "This family, they do not taste the food. They only see it. Be careful of people who eat with their eyes instead of their hearts." I should have listened. But I was in love, and love makes us deaf to wisdom. The first year of marriage was a slow erosion. It started small. Derek would come home from work and sniff the air suspiciously. "What are you making?" "It smells strong." Strong meant garlic. Strong meant onions. Strong meant anything with actual flavor. His mother had raised him on a diet of unseasoned proteins and steamed vegetables, and my Mediterranean heritage was apparently an assault on his delicate palate. I tried to adapt. I toned down the spices. I stopped using fresh herbs. I made the bland, beige meals that Patricia had taught him to expect, hating every moment of it, feeling my culinary soul shrivel a little more with each passing day. But it was never enough. "Mom's pot roast melts in your mouth," Derek would say, pushing my version around his plate. "This is a little tough, don't you think?" "Patricia's mashed potatoes are so creamy," he would sigh. "Yours are kind of lumpy." "Maybe you should ask my mother for some tips," he would suggest, not unkindly, but with that patronizing tone that made me want to scream. "She's been cooking for 40 years. There's no shame in learning from the best." I did ask Patricia for tips. Once. She invited me to her pristine kitchen in Greenwich, Connecticut, where every appliance gleamed and nothing was ever actually used. She showed me her secret recipes, which were mostly canned soups mixed with frozen vegetables and topped with crushed crackers. She demonstrated her famous techniques, which involved microwaving everything and calling it efficient. "The key," she told me with a condescending pat on my hand, "is not to overthink it. Cooking isn't about creativity, dear. It's about consistency. Men want to know exactly what they're getting. No surprises." I went home that day and cried into a bowl of my grandmother's minestrone soup, the recipe I had been forbidden to make because it was too heavy for Derek's stomach. By year 3, I had stopped cooking for joy entirely. I cooked for survival, for peace, for the desperate hope that if I just made the meatloaf exactly right, Derek would look at me the way he used to at that food truck festival. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a disappointment he was too comfortable to leave. The breaking point came on our 7th anniversary. I had planned something special. Despite everything, I still loved my husband, still believed we could find our way back to each other. I spent 2 days preparing a 5-course Italian feast, homemade antipasto, fresh pasta with my grandmother's bolognese, osso buco that had been braising for 6 hours, a salad with vegetables from a local farm, and tiramisu made with espresso I had ground myself. Derek came home late, Patricia in tow. Apparently, he had forgotten to mention that he had invited her to our anniversary dinner. They sat at the table I had decorated with candles and flowers, and they picked at each dish like birds examining something dead on the roadside. "The pasta is too chewy," Patricia said. "The meat is falling off the bone," Derek added. "It's supposed to be more structured. And this dessert is so rich. I don't know how you expect anyone to finish it." I sat in silence, watching them dismantle 7 years of marriage with every criticism, every sigh, every exchanged glance of shared disappointment. When they were finished, Patricia excused herself to the bathroom, and Derek turned to me with the expression of a man delivering bad news he had rehearsed many times. "Bella, we need to talk." He pulled the divorce papers from his briefcase. He had brought them to our anniversary dinner. He had planned this, coordinated it with his mother, turned what should have been a celebration of our love into an execution. "I've tried," he said, sounding exhausted. "I've really tried. But I can't spend the rest of my life eating food that makes me miserable. Mom says a marriage needs a strong foundation, and food is part of that foundation. If you can't even master the basics." "The basics?" I heard my voice crack. "I made you osso buco. From scratch. I've been a professional chef for over a decade. A professional chef who can't make a decent meatloaf." He shook his head. "Mom's meatloaf is perfect. Everyone says so. And yours tastes like cardboard wrapped in disappointment." Patricia returned from the bathroom just in time to witness the final blow. She stood behind her son, arms crossed, smile triumphant. "Sign the papers, dear," she said sweetly. "It's better for everyone. You can go back to your little restaurant job, and Derek can find someone more compatible." I looked at the papers. I looked at my husband. I looked at the feast I had poured my heart into, now cold and congealing on plates that cost more than my first month's rent. And something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like a rubber band pulled too tight that suddenly releases with tremendous force. "You're right," I said, picking up the pen. "I can't cook like your mother." I signed my name with a flourish. "Your mother's food has no soul. No passion. No love. It's technically edible, I suppose, in the same way that cardboard is technically edible. But it will never, ever be good." I stood up, gathered my coat, and walked to the door. But before I left, I turned back one last time. "And Derek? That meatloaf recipe you hate so much? It's been in my family for 4 generations. My great-great-grandmother served it to Italian royalty. But you're right. It's clearly not good enough for the Morrison family palate." I walked out into the cold New York night, homeless, husbandless, and completely free. The next few months were brutal. I couch-surfed with friends, picked up shifts at any restaurant that would have me, and cried myself to sleep more nights than I care to admit. The divorce was finalized quickly. Derek got the apartment, the car, and most of our savings. I got my grandmother's recipe book and a collection of cast-iron pans that Patricia had always hated. It was enough. One night, 3 months after the divorce, I was working a late shift at a small bistro in the East Village. The head chef had called in sick, and I was running the kitchen alone, overwhelmed and exhausted. A food critic from the New York Times walked in unannounced. I didn't know who she was. I just saw a tired woman who looked like she needed comfort. So I abandoned the menu and made her something from my heart, my grandmother's meatloaf, served with roasted garlic mashed potatoes and a red wine reduction that I invented on the spot. She took one bite and closed her eyes. "Who made this?" she demanded. The manager pointed at me, cowering in the kitchen doorway. "This," the critic said, "is the best thing I've eaten in 5 years. What's your name?" "Bella. Bella Fontaine." "Well, Bella Fontaine, you're wasted in this kitchen. Do you have a card?" I didn't have a card. I didn't have anything. But I gave her my phone number, scrawled on a napkin, never expecting to hear from her again. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a restaurant investor who had read the critic's private recommendation. He wanted to meet. He wanted to talk about funding my own restaurant. "I don't have a business plan," I told him. "I don't have anything except recipes." "Recipes are everything," he said. "Come to my office. Let's talk." His name was Marcus Webb, a retired tech entrepreneur who had made his fortune in Silicon Valley and now spent his money funding passion projects that interested him. He had eaten at the bistro the night after the critic's visit, ordered the meatloaf based on her recommendation, and decided on the spot that he wanted to invest. I've eaten at 3 Michelin star restaurants all over the world, Marcus told me. I've had meals that cost more than most people's cars. But your meatloaf made me cry. It tasted like my grandmother's kitchen in Alabama. It tasted like being loved. He offered to fund my restaurant entirely. No strings attached. Full creative control. There's just one condition, he said. You have to promise to never compromise. Never tone it down. Never make it acceptable for people who don't understand. Cook with your whole heart, and I'll handle the rest. I promised. 6 months later, Fontaine's opened in the West Village. The concept was simple: elevated comfort food with Mediterranean influences. Every dish was based on a recipe from my family's collection, updated with modern techniques but never stripped of soul. The meatloaf that Derek had called cardboard was the signature dish, served with a different seasonal accompaniment each week. Food critics descended like locusts, and they left converted. A revelation, wrote the Times. Fontaine's doesn't just serve food, it serves memory, emotion, and an almost aggressive amount of love. The anti-pretentious restaurant of the decade, declared Bon Appetit. Chef Bella Fontaine cooks like your grandmother. If your grandmother had trained at the Culinary Institute of America and harbored a deep, justified grudge against bland food. Within 3 months, we had a 2-month waiting list. Within 6 months, I was approached by the Food Network about a television show. Within a year, I was on the cover of Food and Wine magazine, photographed in my restaurant kitchen, holding a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to my grandmother. The headline read, Bella Fontaine, the chef who cooked her way out of heartbreak. The article told my story. All of it. The marriage, the divorce, the mother-in-law who had made me feel worthless, the meatloaf that started it all. I hadn't planned to share those details, but the journalist was kind, and I was tired of pretending that my success had come from nowhere. The pain is part of the flavor, I told her. Every dish I make carries the memory of being told I wasn't good enough. And every bite is my answer. The magazine hit newsstands on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, the story had gone viral. The restaurant opening for our new location in Tribeca was scheduled for the following month. It was the biggest night of my career, a celebration of everything I had built from the ashes of my marriage. Celebrity guests, food critics, investors, and media packed the venue. I had spent weeks perfecting the menu, training the staff, making sure every detail was exactly right. At 7 p.m., I was in the kitchen doing final preparations when my hostess appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Chef, there's someone at the front asking for you. She's making a scene. I wiped my hands and walked to the entrance, expecting a dissatisfied customer or perhaps an overeager fan. Instead, I found Patricia Morrison. She was thinner than I remembered, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame, her perfectly styled hair showing gray at the roots. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. She looked like a woman who had been crying for days. Bella, she said, her voice cracking. Please. I need to talk to you. The room had gone silent. 300 guests were watching us, phones already raised to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. Patricia, I said calmly. This is a private event. I know, and I'm sorry, but I didn't know where else to go. She was openly sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks. Harold left me. He took everything. The house, the accounts, the business. I found out he's been having an affair for 15 years. 15 years, Bella. Our whole marriage was a lie. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just a hollow kind of recognition. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. But I don't understand what this has to do with me. I have nothing. Nothing. I've been staying with Derek, but he met someone new. A woman who cooks like you. He keeps talking about how her food has soul, how it reminds him of something he lost. She laughed bitterly. He doesn't even realize he's describing you. Patricia. I was wrong. The words tumbled out of her like a confession. I was so wrong about you. About everything. I was jealous, Bella. I spent my whole life being told I was a perfect wife, a perfect mother, a perfect homemaker. And then you came along with your passion and your talent, and you made me feel like everything I had done was worthless. So I tried to make you feel worthless too. The crowd was absolutely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness this. I read the article, Patricia continued. Every word. And I realized that I destroyed my son's chance at happiness because I couldn't stand to be outshone by a woman half my age. I taught him to hate the very thing he fell in love with. And now he's alone, and I'm alone, and you're. She gestured at the restaurant, at the crowd, at the empire I had built. You're everything I never had the courage to be. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of 7 years of pain pressing against my chest. I thought about all the meals I had dumbed down, all the dreams I had postponed, all the pieces of myself I had sacrificed on the altar of Patricia Morrison's approval. And then I made a choice. Would you like to stay for dinner? I asked. Patricia's eyes went wide. What? There's an empty seat at table 12. The tasting menu is 7 courses. I think you might find it educational. I gestured to my hostess, who led a stunned Patricia to her seat. That night, I served the most personal menu I had ever created. Each course told a story: the antipasto my grandmother made for my first birthday, the pasta I cooked for Derek on our first date, the meatloaf that had ended my marriage and started my career, and for dessert, a tiramisu recipe that had never been written down, passed from mother to daughter in my family for 5 generations. I watched Patricia eat every bite. I watched her close her eyes, watched tears stream down her face, watched her finally understand what she had been too proud to see before. After the last course, she found me in the kitchen. I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness, she said quietly. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now. Food isn't about perfection. It's about love. And you have more love in one dish than I've had in my entire life. She pressed something into my hand. It was a small, weathered index card, handwritten in faded ink. This is my grandmother's recipe for buttermilk biscuits, she said. It's the only thing I ever made that Harold actually loved. I want you to have it. Maybe you can make it better than I ever could. I looked at the card, at the shaky handwriting, at this small piece of Patricia's history that she was offering as a peace treaty. I'll put it on the menu, I said. As a special. I'll call it Patricia's Biscuits. She started crying again. You don't have to. I know. But here's what I've learned, Patricia. The best recipes come from pain that's been transformed into something nourishing. Your biscuits, my meatloaf, they're the same thing. We just needed different fires to bake them. 2 years later, Fontaine's has 3 locations. The television show is in its 2nd season. The James Beard Award sits on a shelf in my office, next to my grandmother's original recipe book and a framed copy of that Food and Wine cover. Derek reached out once, about 6 months after the restaurant opening. He wanted to meet, to talk, to explore possibilities. I declined politely. Some ingredients, once spoiled, can never be saved. Patricia, surprisingly, has become something like a friend. She volunteers at a soup kitchen now, learning to cook for people who need comfort rather than critics. She's terrible at it, but she's trying, and that counts for something. Last week, she made my meatloaf for the first time. She sent me a photo, the meat slightly overcooked, the presentation messy, but unmistakably made with love. It's not as good as yours, she texted. But it's the best thing I've ever made. I smiled at my phone and typed back, that's because it's the first thing you've made with your heart instead of your ego. Welcome to real cooking. My grandmother once told me that food is the purest form of love. I didn't understand then what she really meant. Love isn't about perfection. It isn't about meeting someone else's standards or fitting into someone else's mold. Love is about putting your whole self into something and offering it to the world, knowing that some people won't understand, knowing that some people will reject it, but doing it anyway because the alternative is a life half lived. Derek wanted a wife who cooked like his mother. He got one who cooked like nobody else. And that, in the end, was the secret ingredient he was too afraid to taste.